Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover your self acceptance and step into your personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have Johanna Burkhart with us. She is a truth teller, multidimensional channel, teacher, quantum healer, author, certified DNA activation, and restructurer and creator of the Purification Process. She has been seen in many magazines, podcasts, and radio shows and telesummits. Joanna's mission is to help you be the change that you want to see so that you can create the reality that you desire through shifting your frequency. And Joanna lost her dad back in 2015 and went through a process with that. And I'm excited for her to share her story because it put her on a path to be where she's at today. And so, without further ado, Joanna, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Likewise, and I know it's been a long time since you and I talked, but I do remember you sharing with me how important your father was in your life.
Yeah. Um, he wasn't just important, but he was my everything. Like I anchored everything into him, my safety, my identity. We had a very codependent and enmeshed relationship that wasn't healthy in that way. But y- you just don't realize those things until they're missing or they're not there anymore. And you wonder, what is this feeling that is coming up? Um, and my story actually starts before he died because in 2013, I had made the decision to move cross country. And just in a way, I was running from my life. I had realized at some level that our codependency wasn't healthy anymore. And instead of knowing at that moment how to communicate that to him and how to work through those emotions and how to set boundaries, I did what I did best, which was just run. I just ran away from my problem. And so I met somebody and I moved cross country. And something I like to say is you can't ever outrun yourself. You can't ever outrun your problems. They're going to come knocking. And mine came knocking within 2 months with the death of my grandmother, who was like my mom, because my mom wasn't around. She had left when I was 3. And I didn't deal with that death whatsoever. Absolutely did not deal with it. I had a lot of anger, didn't process it. But it began my awakening journey at a deeper level. And about a year after that happened, my dad started acting very different. He quit video calling me every week. We quit talking all the time. He was in and out of the hospital. He wasn't telling me what was happening in his life and what was really going on. And I had this knowing that something was really wrong, but I was in a state of denial. Like nobody wants to face that when you are so attached to somebody, when you love somebody so much. In 2015 was one of the best and worst years of my life. I just gotten a promotion. We were building a house. I had wedding invitations sent out, and we decided to go home to San Diego to watch my daughter graduate high school. And I knew I was going to see my dad. And I'll never forget that day because sitting in the airport, I remember having this feeling like I know everything's about to change. I know that what I'm about to see and walk into is not going to be good. I just had this knowing of like bracing for impact. And we flew in late that night. And the next morning, um, we was staying next door to my dad's, and I ran over like a 12-year-old little girl, so excited to see her dad. And I ran into his room, and he was 56 at the time, and he looked like he was 86. And I do not have a poker face. I just don't. And I remember working as hard as I could to not have an expression on my face of complete devastation and horror because he looked like he was 86. He had loose skin. His hair was gray and loose, and he was so skinny and frail. And it was like the one of the worst days of my life. And we spent the week together. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't let me go to the doctor with him. He was very jaundiced. It was very apparent that he was having liver issues. And we were only there for a week. And I remember telling my then husband when we left, I'm going to be back really soon. Like, I have a feeling whatever's going on, he's not going to survive this. And it was about 36, 48 hours, somewhere in there. I had come back. Walked into work Monday morning, and within 30 minutes, I got a phone call that said, "We found your dad in the street." And he was convulsing and delirious from the bile. And I immediately went home, was on a plane the next day, went straight to the hospital to be told by the doctors that he had 4 months to live. Um, that moment was like Charlie Brown. It was like the moment they said that 4 months to live, everything else that came out of the doctor's mouth was like want, 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 want. And I was in a tunnel. Like I couldn't process. It's like I got stuck right in that moment. And when he was done, he put it on me to tell my dad, and I couldn't do it. I immediately shut it down, went into denial, and was like, "You're going to be okay. We're going to sell your home. We're going to retire you. You can't drive anymore anyway. We're going to move you to the East Coast. You're going to live out your fishing dreams on the Atlantic Sea with your grandson." Like I sold him this pipe dream to try to keep him alive and to make him believe that he could get better. And even though he fought it, um, he agreed. And I watched his face as I literally sold his whole entire life that he worked for pennies on the dollar and just washed everything away. And then spent the next 4.5 months taking care of a dying man with little to no support, emotionally, physically, financially, mentally, like all of it. It was all on me. And I could feel myself pulling away from him and not spending the quality time that I could have spent with him, and just being in full blown denial to the point to where we could barely be in the same room towards the end. Um, and as he got more combative and didn't want to take his medicine that kept him alive and all these other things, I remember one day I just had enough, and I was so tired and from being in resistance. And I just looked at him and I said, they gave you 4 months to live. It's been 4.5 months. He died within a week of that.
Oh wow, that's fast. Wait, what did he what did he have cancer? Did he have
He was in liver failure. He was an alcoholic most of his life. Ironically, I just had this conversation with my brother. I said, I remember being like 6 and 7 years old and my dad telling me I'm not going to live past 50. I'm never going to live past 50. And I think the only reason why I did was because I had my son so late, and it like, I don't know, it gave him life again. It gave him something. And then after I moved, he didn't have his mom anymore. Most of our family, extended family, we were kind of estranged. He didn't have me, I was the center of his world. I did everything for him. I paid his bills with his money. I cleaned his house. I did his shopping. I was his chauffeur when he drank too much. Like we just overly depended upon each other. And so he lived wide open. He ate whatever he wanted. He drank whatever he wanted. He spent money like crazy. Like he just knew, he always knew he wasn't going to live a long life. Um, but yeah, it was liver failure, and it's a horrific way to go. It really is a horrific way to go.
Yeah, what was that like towards the end? Because I know you said you had a very codependent relationship with him, but what was that like at the end of his life when you had to say goodbye and realizing that, you had played such a big role in his life? And I can tell he was kind of a lavish guy in that sense of living completely free and, as you said, wide open. And I
Yeah.
know people like that, and I commend them on a lot of aspects for having that freedom and that
Yeah.
confidence within themselves. But on the other side of it, is always that place where things catch up with you in a certain way,
Yeah.
like liver failure. Um,
Yes.
but what was it like for you to go through that life transition when he was passing? Because that's all of a sudden you're used to this one part of life where you're very
Yeah.
codependent with him, and all of a sudden he's going to be gone, and now it's almost like having to rediscover what this next phase of life is going to look like for you.
It was challenging. So I wasn't processing anything. I was in such resistance until he died. When he died 3 days before Thanksgiving, which ironically was his favorite holiday. Um, the day he died, I had just left hospice. He was only in hospice for 3 days, and I left, and I had just made it to the gas station, so maybe 15 minutes down the road, and I got the call that he had passed, and they wanted me to come back, and I was like, I can't do it. I can't I can't see him that way. Um, And I had my daughter with me and I had to hold it together. So I get home and I remember I walked in the door and I just felt this sense of relief. And then I felt grief. And I immediately started to shut it down. But what was interesting was it took me about a month to fully feel this. I can't even articulate it. It's like I had felt safe my whole entire life, and it was a false sense of security. I knew my dad would always be there. I knew my dad would always be there to pick me up. I knew he would always have the words of wisdom. I always knew I could count on him. He was the only person in my life I knew I could count on. Like when, and I don't mean that figuratively, he literally was the only person in my life I could count on. And it was like I woke up one day and was like, I don't have anybody. I don't have anyone. I don't have my husband. I don't have my extended family. I'm not close with my siblings. I am my mom, and I have an estranged relationship and are just learning now to get back to a healthy place, but she was missing from my life most of it. And that is a feeling that I don't wish upon anybody because it is, you just feel like it is me against the world. And there's like, if something goes wrong, if something fails, like, where do I go? What do I do? And when that happened, it woke me up in a different level. It brought all of the traumas in my life because I have suffered every kind of abuse that you can ever think of and imagine. And I repressed a lot of it, and it all came back at once. All these horrific memories, all of these horrific feelings in my body. And at the same time, all of my sensory, my extrasensory abilities, being able to see, hear, feel, communicate with spirit, like it all turned on all at once. And I wanted to crawl 10 feet underground and just bury myself in the earth. Like I didn't, it was so overwhelming. It was so overstimulating. And so I'm like trying to process grief of this most important person in my life is not here, while also processing all the pain of the emotional abandonment that he did to me. Like he wasn't, all this time I was like, he was my only person. And then it was like the universe was coming in and going, that's not true because for 6 years of your life, he emotionally abandoned you when you needed him the most. And I don't know why it happened that way. And then at that moment, I just felt abandoned by the world. I felt abandoned by God. I felt abandoned by my dad, everybody. It was a very sobering and very painful thing that all of that happening literally led me to the edge of suicide, where I was like, I can't do this. I can't be here anymore. Like, what's the point? I have nothing to live for. And I mean, I had 2 children. I was married. I had a business. I had all kinds of things to live for, but the meaning of life was gone in that moment because I was just so weighed down by the pain and the grief and not having the person that I always thought I had, and then realizing yeah, he was still my person and he was still the one I could count on for physical things or, whatever. But the thing that I actually needed the most from him, I actually didn't get. And I had a lot of regret because I realized that in that 4.5 months, we could have worked through a lot of that. We could have talked about it. We could have, and it was a missed opportunity. And I also had a lot of regret because I blamed myself. I blamed the fact that if I wouldn't have left, if I wouldn't have ran from my problems, then he would still be alive. And it took me until earlier this year in full transparency to let that go. I held and he died 10 years ago. And so I've been holding on to that for almost 10 years.
Well, that's something I always coach people through is that grief doesn't really have a time frame or a timeline for things. And I just want to say I commend you for being transparent about that, by the way, because a lot of people try to suppress that or hide
Yeah.
it and act like they're fine and they're really not. They're hurting
No.
inside. And For you to get to that place, by the way, of acceptance is very, very hard. Very, very hard. It's a place to really. I try to tell people that accepting that, like you said, you have a lot of regrets, and coming to that place to just accept it. It doesn't mean we like it and agree to it, but
Yeah.
it's our ability to stop denying reality and just say, this is where I'm at. This is what this feels like. This is what it is, not what I think it is. And that
Yeah.
really almost breaks you free of that regret in a lot of ways. But it's a very
Yeah.
painful road to get there.
And I always say that too, acceptance is not agreement. And logically and spiritually, I knew that that wasn't true. As a channeler, and working with so many people, the guides have come in 1,000 times instead of 1,000 different ways of that anyone who crosses over, right? They're not dead. They've just changed form, right? Everybody still exists. They're just in a different form. And two, we have an exit date of when we want to exit this game, if we want to call it that. But we also have off ramps, and we can take those. And whether it's through a tragic accident or a murder or suicide or um, an illness or whatever, however it happens, that's how they chose to go out. No, every single time. There's no the spirit has said that so many times. And even though I would be doing through my healing, after a couple of years of healing, I transitioned my business coaching into more spiritual work. And I would start having all these people come to me. In the first few years, I couldn't do mediumship at all. Not that they weren't there, but because it hit on my grief so bad that I would cry during sessions. And I was like, this is not, I can't do this. And so I had to wait until I was a little bit more healed. But even after that, like I kept hearing it over and over and over again. And it was like, I knew it was true, but the little girl inside of me was like, it's your fault. You did this. If you wouldn't have left, and I could not deny that feeling was so strong. That belief in me was so strong. And I don't know what happened earlier this year, but it was just this willingness to set it down and say, it just would have happened a different way, but he still wouldn't be here today.
I'm curious to ask you the question about off ramps because I do feel like in a lot of ways, I'm very spiritual in many aspects of my life, and I do realize that there's this old phrase that's been around a long time about everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
And that's one phrase I don't like in the throes of grief because it comes across like writing something off or just
Insensitive.
like,
Yep.
yeah, making peace with things. And I don't always agree with the phrase, but I do feel like in many ways, what that phrase really truly means is that there's things that happen or situations that come up. And like you were talking about off ramps, I do feel like we do have, in many ways, we can always leave this world on our own terms. We can, whatever way you want to choose that, you can. And it doesn't always mean it's the right path for us. But I do feel like sometimes when we do have those moments, for some reason, spirit guides us and pushes us on a different path because we're not done with our time here. We haven't accomplished what we set out to be in this world.
Yeah. It can be that, or you can have, this is why a lot of people have NDEs, near death experiences, and they choose to come back. It can be spirit saying, no, like you gotta go back. You're not done. You have more to work through. And it can also be you realizing, oh, this isn't what I wanted. I actually do want to stay here. I do want to live. And it's usually not until we fully accepted that we don't want to be here that the light comes in. It's in that moment of acceptance that we open our heart and then we see the light. And I went through so many phases of that through my grief healing. And I mean, I still have grief come up, obviously, or I wouldn't have gotten teary-eyed on this. I always say grief is a wild animal. You never know when it's going to show up. It just does. And it's okay. But I had so many moments on my path of acceptance. Um, and every time I had those moments of acceptance, I opened my heart more and more and more and more and let more light in and more love in and was able to connect to him more. But for me, I think I held on to so much of that grief for so long because it was my only connection to him in my mind. If I let go of the pain, I'm not going to feel him anymore. And I had healed enough at probably 5 6 years in to where I could start to hear him again and I could start to feel him again in a different way. And he's really been Loved ones are never guides, but they're more of guardian angels. They're always there to support you and love you and to remind you that you're not alone. And he would just continuously come in and bring up these stories or memories or things that I was stuck in because I literally at in some level became frozen in time of when not when he died, but the 2 years before that when I left. It's weird how I kind of regressed back and there was a part of me that was stuck in time. So much so that when I went back, 9 years after he had died, I'd gone back home for one of his, he called him his brother, but he wasn't. But that was that brotherhood, that real closeness to a funeral for someone else. And I saw all the people that I'd seen every day in my life because of him. And none of them recognized me, and I didn't recognize any of them. And it was because of how much I was frozen in time, not because of aging. I mean, 9 years is a lot, but it's not. It was such an interesting thing. But he would come in these moments and he'd bring up these scenarios or these stories or the situations, especially in meditation. And he kept showing me, you're frozen, you're frozen, you're frozen. And if you can let go of the version of me that was there before everything happened, you'll actually be closer to me. If you can open your heart and let go of holding on to that pain, you're going to be closer to me. You're going to hear me more. You're going to feel me more. You're going to feel a closer connection to me. And it's true. The more I let go, the more I open up, the more I accept that he's exactly where he's supposed to be, the more close I feel to him without the pain, without the grief, to where now I can talk about my story more. I can hear songs, his song for me. I can see symbols. And I just giggle, I just giggle and say, hi, Dad. I don't, it's, there are times when it's emotional, but for the most part, it's just like a little wink from him, like, hey, I'm with you. We're right here. It's cool. I'm on, I see what's happening in your life right now. Like, I'm not missing anything.
So what was that like for you when you started getting your spiritual gifts? 'Cause it sounds like this all happened right after your dad passed, and
Yeah.
I've talked to several people that have become mediums through this experience, and it can feel very overwhelming. It can feel like a
Yeah.
lot of energy coming at you. For some people I've talked to, they can connect with multiple spirits at once, and it's almost like having a radio on in the background while you're just trying to live your life. What
Yeah.
was what what was it like for you as you discovered your spiritual gifts after losing your father?
Well, for me, it was more of a remembrance because I my gifts were open as a child, and I just shut them down after I had an experience around the age of 7 that freaked me out. But I was still always I was obsessed with Sylvia Brown. As a child, I'd run home from school and watch her on Montel Williams, just kind of aging myself right now. Um, I was obsessed with aliens. I was obsessed with all these things, and I never really knew why. But when that happened, it was overwhelming. And it first began with the feeling. So I could feel other people's emotions. I could feel when other people were sick, like if there was something wrong with them, even if they didn't know it. I was hearing and seeing and feeling people that weren't there. And I knew things that nobody else knew. And it was a rough couple of years because I lived in the Bible Belt of North Carolina with people that were already not receptive to me as a California girl. And so when I kind of came out of the spiritual closet and I started talking to the few people that I knew, I mean, most people thought I was crazy. I mean, even my husband thought I was crazy and didn't know what was going on with me or what was happening with me. And I was what appeared to be sick all the time because when that happens, when you start letting that amount of light in, there's a thing called ascension. And ascension is your body moving from a carbon state to a crystalline state where you get rid of the density. The density transmutes into light. And it was like I was going through years of purging, and there was such a physical aspect to that. And I started becoming more sensitive to solar flares and astrological alignments and other people's energy. And I had to take a crash course. And it was through spirit communicating with me and guiding me through that process of what it meant to have boundaries, not just physical boundaries. I think that's where people miss the mark. It's energetic boundaries. It's not absorbing other people's energy. It's not reading the room and reading everybody in hypervigilance to try to figure out what's about to happen so that you can be prepared for it. And that was what was taking me down. That's what was overwhelming me was I was just a walking sponge. And that came from my trauma, right? As a child, the only way was safe was if I could read their emotions, I could read their mind, and I could know what was about to happen next so that I could maneuver myself and keep myself safe. And I tell a lot of healers and channelers and people on this path, it's, it's, it's not that we chose to go through the trauma, but it really was a training boot camp. It makes us really good at reading other people and reading energy and communicating with spirit. So it was um, overwhelming to say the least. I was an extrovert turned introvert. I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to be in restaurants. I didn't want to go to parades. I didn't want to go out in big events because I couldn't discern between where I ended and someone else began. I couldn't discern yet between my thoughts of what I was receiving from parts of me or receiving from spirit. Receiving, was it a loved one? Was it a guide? Um, was it an animal talking to me? And it took me probably 2 years of really dedicated, committed practice to and what I was receiving from spirit to get good at that. And now it's something that I infuse in everything that I do is teaching people that because it literally changed my life. I could then learn how to manage and turn things down when I was being a human and not have to. It's not like it goes away. It's just like turning the radio down to very little, right? Or turning the frequency down enough to where it's not consuming you. Learning how to have boundaries with energetic boundaries with spirit and say, like, no, when I'm doing this, like, this is not appropriate. I'm not going to be Teresa Caputo walking up to strangers on the street to tell them things. Like, that's not an integrity. We're not doing that. And so I had to learn how to manage that. Because what people don't understand is the spirit world isn't they're not going to have boundaries with you. They're especially other people's loved ones. If you're standing next to somebody and that spirit's like, oh, this is my opportunity to get a message through, they're going to use my light and try to do that. They're trying to help that person. Um, and it's not that they don't care, they're just taking advantage of the opportunity. But what I've learned is you never know where someone is on their grief journey. And that may be very triggering to them. It may set them back. And so I don't ever condone or agree with that. But boundaries, that's energetic boundaries literally saved my life because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to come back to who I am and enjoy the things that I like to do because it was so overwhelming. And again, it pushed on anywhere I was still grieving, you know, um, and it would just cause this emotional overwhelm to come over me. And so I'm really grateful that I was brave enough and willing enough to listen to this knowing that was coming through me, or sometimes it came in the form of audience where I could hear it and just trusted it for whatever reason and was like, let me just see if this works. I mean, obviously someone's trying to help me, so let me just try it and practice it. And the more I did that, the more information I got. And then the more, the more I could move forward. Um, and then, by 2018, I had fully transitioned into, trauma coaching and mediumship and helping people learn about their gifts because I was like, if I could tell someone this, it might save them 2 years of hell of just feeling like you're being swallowed up by something you can't see. And sometimes I mean, I see in full apparition, which can freak you out in the beginning because they look very real. The tell is they don't have feet. They're always hovering. I don't know why I mean, they don't walk. It makes sense, right? But when they come in full apparition form, they never have feet.
So, I mean, do they look like you and I talking on the
Yeah.
podcast today, or?
They look like regular, but they'll come through in the way that two different ways. Either the way that you will most recognize them, so that could be at a different age than what they died, um, or the way that they felt best in this human life. So, like when my grandma came back to me in 2013, she died in March of, no. God, I'm forgetting, June 8th of 2013, she died. And it was about 4 or 5 months later. I was in the middle of the night sleeping, and it was like someone had tied a rope right underneath my chest and pulled me straight up like a board. And I'm sitting there, and she's floating in front of me at the end of my bed. And she looked like she was about in her mid 30s. My grandmother always looked like Lucille Ball when she was younger. She looked so beautiful. And she was talking to me, but her lips weren't moving because it was telepathic, but I knew everything that she was saying. And she was telling me that my dad was sick and that I needed to help him. And that's part of the other reason why I had such regret, because I was like, I told my husband the next morning and he thought I was insane. But
That
I couldn't tell my dad. I don't know why I couldn't do it. And I think part of me knew it was true and I was just too afraid to know the truth. And so I didn't. But that was the not the first time I'd ever seen an apparition, but the first time since a child that I had seen her in apparition form. But she legit looked like she was in my house. I could see the they're a little bit more translucent than us, but you can still see every feature, everything. You can feel their demeanor, you can feel their state of being. But they just can they choose the way that they want to appear.
That is really powerful, and I just want to piggyback off that. I've
Yeah.
had dreams after losing my grandfather and my son that are just too. I don't share it with everybody, but I share it with people who are open to that because
Yeah.
I can never explain it in real form and say like, yeah, it actually happened or not. But it was so real to me when it happened, like the way you experienced saying that your grandmother appeared in front of the bed. I don't doubt that, by the way. I
Yeah.
really do think that happened. And I do think I do think when we pass on from this world, it's just a transition. It's not the end
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
I
You
did
never stop existing. You never stop existing.
I did a podcast with a medium. I did a medium reading with her months after the fact, but I never told her a single thing about my grandfather. And when we were on the show, I mentioned one thing that he never believed in the afterlife. I used to watch Ghost Adventures a lot on TV. I found it fascinating. I was obsessed, like you said, you were obsessed growing up with Sylvia Brown. I was obsessed with Ghost Adventures because I found it so out there and so just fascinating how to talk to spirit um, and so, long story short, I mentioned that my grandfather didn't believe in death, and she like looked up really weird in the camera on the podcast, and I was like, "What are you doing?" He just said, "Earth, you become earthworm or worm food," and I
Yeah.
was like, "What the?" I was like, "I never told you that," and I hadn't heard my grandfather say that in 10 years, like no joke, hadn't heard that. And after we got done recording, I was like, Becky, how did you even know that? I never told you anything about him. And
Yeah.
she said, he's not gone. He just transitioned.
Yeah.
He's always still there. So I think that if we can all be open-minded enough in these moments of life, and I know they're very hard when you lose somebody, just like you said, losing your dad when you're that codependent with somebody, it's hard to go through that transition
Yeah.
because we're still here reeling from it from a human perspective. But when it's in that spiritual realm, we still can connect with them. They just transition to a different aspect of
Yeah.
their life. I wanted to ask you too about something because this has happened to me a lot. I've been seeing feathers lately for the last 2 weeks. I don't know what the deal is with that, and I don't like look for them. I'm just like walking around and just boom, there's a feather right on the sidewalk, right in my path. Do you see signs or objects like that from your father as you go through life?
Not, I mean, I call them red birds. They're cardinals. Cardinals are usually a sign from him, but it's harder to discern because there's so many cardinals around. So it's depending on the behavior of the bird. And I remember not only my dad telling me this in spirit form, but I've channeled it many times, that when we transition into spirit, we can kind of control birds like a remote control. So if you ever see a bird like do something weird, like they're just sitting on your hand, they don't move, or they keep hitting the window or whatever, it's probably somebody, either a loved one or a guide, usually a loved one, trying to get your attention and let you know, like, this bird's doing something odd. So it's not normal. This is us trying to communicate with you. But for him, he communicates best through me, through music. And so Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses will, like on my birthday this year, I went out to dinner with friends and we had no idea where we were going to go. And we were like last minute decided to go see this 80s cover band. And back to back, he played Sweet Child of Mine, which I immediately was in tears because I knew he was there. And then he played my son doesn't live with me, lives in North Carolina. And so the next song was Don't Stop Believing by Journey, which is my son and I's song. And it was just a weird thing being back to back. And that's happened, like the weird things that happen. My mom's song, the song that reminds me of my mom, even though she's still alive, and then my dad's, I went on a date one time and both of those songs played back to back. Like it's like the odds of that happening are pretty slim. And you just get this overwhelming feeling. My grandma, it's Shiny Dimes. There's one sitting right here. So after she died, before she even came back in apparition form, I would clean, like stress clean the whole house, spotless. There would be nothing on the counters. And then I'd walk into the bedroom to get something and come out, and there'd be a brand new shiny dime sitting on the counter. And that kept happening over and over again. And here's what I always tell people, whether it's a feather, a bird, a butterfly, a dime, a song, when you see it, you're going to get a feeling or a knowing immediately. If you don't, it's probably just a random thing. Like, I don't think anything is random, but at the same time, we attach meaning to it, right? So sometimes spirit says we think things are signs that are not signs, but it gives us the hope to keep going, and it's okay that we attach that meaning. But when you see something like the dime or the song and you all of a sudden get this feeling or this knowing, and that person pops into your head, that's them. That's how you'll know the difference. Same thing with any type of synchronicity showing up, so you really have to pay attention to what's the very first thing that comes in for you and however way it comes in.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that because I think it's 2 months ago now, I don't find dimes on the ground very often, like at all. And I happened to find one a couple months back. And I looked at the date on it because I always look at dates on coins when I find them. And anyway, it said 2018 on it. And I sat that back and said, okay, well, what was going on in 2018? And it was the year my grandfather got diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia that's incurable. And we went through chemo and we went through a nasty car accident and he ended up in a rehab center for 2, 3 months. And so I was looking back and saying, that was his way of saying, like, I'm here. That was his
Yeah.
way of saying, hey, I'm still here. I haven't left. And
Yeah.
so I always encourage people when you do find a coin, look at the year on it because you
Yeah.
may find out that it resonates with some big thing that happened in your life or a time of transition or turbulence that happened. You
And
know,
they'll
I
communicate with you the way they know that you receive it. So the fact that you always check the dates on the coin, that's why the coin had the date, because that's something that you do, and he knew you would do that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's what I think is so powerful about these symbols. I haven't had a really random one that I still cannot explain, but I left Target one day, got in my car, and anyway, I'm driving. I literally backed out of my parking spot, got about 20 feet down the parking lane or whatever, and all of a sudden I smell this strong um, pipe tobacco and this strong wood smell. My grandfather's a contractor, and I literally stopped the car in the lane. Thankfully, nobody was behind me, but I literally stopped the car and I was like, okay, this is weird. And then
Yeah.
my wife was like, what are you talking about? I said, I smell my grandfather's pipe tobacco and it smells like our old van we drove in for my whole childhood. It literally smells like it right here, right now. And I have a newer car, like a 2019. It doesn't have, it should smell like new car, but this thing
Yeah.
smelled like an old van. And I stopped and started laughing and I just spoke in the air and I said, okay, Grandpa, I get it. You're around. I Thanks for dropping
Exactly.
by. Like,
Yeah.
so
I love
yeah,
that. Um,
yeah.
but it's just to bring comfort, and that they just want us to move on. They just want us to be happy. They just want us to know that they see everything. They don't hold resentment. They don't hold anger. There's nothing that could have been done. They don't want their death vindicated. Like, these are all the things that continuously come up when I'm doing things. The one thing I do want to say, and I don't know why, but I keep feeling being nudged to tell this story. So after my dad died, I was so desperate to have communication with him because of how quickly my grandmother came back to me. And it wasn't happening. And so I was like, forget it. I'm gonna go to a medium. And I went to the first medium, is actually a very famous medium. I did not think he did a good job, but the second medium I went to, she kept telling me all these little things that didn't resonate with me. She kept saying, like, he keeps showing me this little white dog, for example. And I'm like, one, we were not little dog people. We always had big dogs. And I was like, I don't ever remember him telling any stories about him having a little white dog. Like he had a deer, he had a pet deer. Like, why wouldn't he bring that up? You know, he had this or that. And I got stuck on that in the reading. And I don't remember much after that because in my eyes, it like shut off. Oh, she's not real. She's not really talking to him, right? So about a year later, I am like, I really need to go through my grandma's boxes. It's totally not even related to my dad, but my grandma, when she died, I got all of her photos. My grandma was like the best record keeper of our family. And I was like, I'm going to take some of these and I'm going to give the rest to my uncle. I just can't keep holding on to all of this. It's their childhood anyway, right? So I'm going through all these photos, and I mean boxes and boxes. And this photo comes up. And I had remembered after that reading, I had reached out to my cousins and my uncle, who we didn't have a great relationship, but I was like, hey, did you guys ever have a white dog? Like a little white dog? Like this is how stuck I was on this detail. And they're like, no, no. Wouldn't you know it, there is a damn photo of him and his younger brother playing on the floor with a white little, like Shih Tzu, tiny ass dog. And I was like, oh my God. I don't know how long they had this dog. I don't know anything about this dog, but this is the dog that he was talking about. Like, how would that? I, it like blew my mind. And after that moment, one, it changed the way that I did mediumship. But two, it made me realize that when we go into these readings with mediums, especially when we're in grief, we have an expectation or a desire to hear something in particular. And all they're doing, all the spirit world is doing is trying to reconfirm to us that we haven't gone anywhere. We're just not in physical form. They're just trying to give proof of life in a sense. And they do so by giving these weird things that we wouldn't think about, or these little details that person would not know. The medium's job is to prove that they're communicating with the person that you're wanting to talk to, not to necessarily give you messages from that person, because the message is always the same. I'm happy, I'm healthy, I love you, I'm here, life is perfect. Like there's nothing else that you really need to know. They don't hold any anger, regret, resentment. There's nothing they need to work through. They've already worked through it. And so it changed a lot of things for me. So I don't know why that came up, but if you are someone who's grieving and you go to a medium, be open to what they say, even if you don't know what they're talking about, because I guarantee you that loved one will make sure you find exactly that to prove that they were, in fact, telling you the truth. And I'll never forget that story ever because it just blew my mind about how stuck I got on that and the fact that almost a year later, I found the photo that proved, even though everyone in the family is like, we never had that. I'm like, well, here's photographic evidence. You did. You must not have liked the dog a whole lot, you know? But I just think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I always tell people I never recommend going to a medium in the first 6 months of grieving. It's too, you need time to process before you're going to be receptive to what's going to be said anyway.
I couldn't agree more with you on that because I wanted to go to a medium really bad after losing my kid because I did not understand why it happened, but I something told me this isn't the right time. This isn't you're too biased in a sense is what I'll use, and I hope nobody gets offended by that, but I'm just saying you get too biased because of your
Yeah.
grief. And what also can happen is you purposely are looking for answers and you're not just being receptive to what comes through.
Yeah.
And I did my mediumship reading this year, and it was 2.5 years after losing my son. And I'm glad I waited the time I did because I broke down and cried in my medium reading. I'm not gonna lie. I told my son I have a lot of regret for what happened during that time period before he was born, and I wish I
Yeah.
had spent more time. And he said, I know you love me. I know you do. You show it every day. And he's
Yeah.
just like, and it came through of like, you have a big purpose because of me, a big one that you still don't even fully know yet. And so there was just so much beautiful messages that came out of the mediumship reading. And, the other thing I want to piggyback on that you've alluded to, especially with talking about the white dog in particular, if you go to a medium reading, be completely open minded. Do not walk into
Yeah.
it with expectation. Don't walk into it with, I want this or I need to hear that. Show up completely as I will just take what resonates, leave what doesn't.
Yeah.
But I'll be completely open minded to what comes through because what you talked about with that white dog, everybody's saying, oh, that no, we never had that. Oh, that didn't exist. Oh, that, but it kept picking at you. And that's what
Yeah.
I try to tell people in the world of mediumship and the world of spirituality. Those things that you keep picking on that you can't let go of, 9 times out of 10, they are real. And you have to
Yeah.
dig for it, by the way. But when you find it, it's going to bring this sense of calm to you and this
Yeah.
really sense of reassurance
Yeah.
that that was a real sign. That was a thing there saying, "Hey, I'm still here. I'm definitely in your world still."
Yeah.
Um, so I love that you shared that story, by the way.
And I was going to ask you, like, would you be interviewing people about grief on a podcast and helping others if your son hadn't died?
No, I
No.
wouldn't. I've told people, and transparency, I haven't even shared this with you, but I'm writing an anthology today with 22 people out of my podcast this year. And
That's awesome.
yeah, and I got asked one day, how'd you get in the grief coach space? And I said, if you asked me 2.5, 3 years ago if I would be doing this, I would have shook my head at you and laughed and be like, no, I wouldn't be here. Like, that's crazy. But out of my son's passing, I have a podcast. I've recorded over, I think I'm at 102 episodes now. I'm writing an
Yeah.
anthology. I'm coaching people through grief. All these things have happened because of the way that I lost him.
Yeah.
And so I can sit there and say that, it was a tragedy and it was very, very painful. It was the worst thing I've gone through in my life, to be dead honest. But there's so much beauty coming out of it that I can't be angry. I can't be super sad about
Right.
it anymore because I celebrate him every day. And,
Yeah.
I can throw that question back at you too, by the way. Had you not lost your dad the way that you did, had you not gone through that grief journey the way that you did, would you have really redeveloped those skills in the spiritual world? Would you have been able to connect with spirit the way that you do today?
Um,
And
I'd like to say eventually, but I probably would still be running a, I would probably still be doing business coaching, or I would probably have gone back to owning an insurance agency. Um, and that's the thing that came through the most beautifully years and years later is everything happens for your benefit, even when you can't see it. And what my dad was able to tell me as I let go of that grief more and more was in 2013, when you left, what you really did was break the soul contract that we had to be this way. You were saying you were ready to fly free. You were ready to be on your own. You were ready to go live your big life. You did not need me the same way anymore. Because I used to always say, it's because I knew I broke the contract, but and same with my grandmother, because those were the two closest people in my life. But I blamed myself for doing that. And he said, no, what you were signaling to the universe is I'm ready to do it on my own. I'm ready to be free. And in order for you to truly do it on your own and be free, my passing was going to bring up all the things that were weighing you down. It was going to force you to face yourself. It was going to force you to face your pain. It was going to force you to make space inside of you so that you could go out and do the very thing you were meant to do in the first place. And this was just all a part of the plan. And maybe the way that it goes down isn't the like we're not out there going, okay, you're going to drink too much and then you're going to die of liver failure. It's not that detailed, but it is a plan that's put in place, and how it plays out in the real world is our free will, how we do it. Um, but that never left me because I was like, okay, it wasn't my fault because I broke the contract. It was me saying, I'm ready to do this. And these are the things that needed to happen in order for me to fully become who I was meant to be and who I was meant to help. And so he was honoring and playing his role. Um, and that's something that I think a lot of people need to hear. Everything is always happening for your benefit. And loss is the hardest one to see as any kind of benefit. But I can guarantee you I would not be who I am today if that had not happened.
What I really love what you said there is that everything that's happening for us, it's not happening to us. And one other thing you hit on that was very, very big that I tell people about grief is when you lose somebody like a dad that was close to you or a son like me, you are not going to be the same person. I don't
Mm-mm.
care how hard you try. I don't care how hard you try to force that. It's never going to happen. And that's where grief can get very heavy and very hard to navigate, is in that area. And
Yeah,
when we realize that we're not going to be that same person because that person, we might have lost that person in our life, they died, that version of ourselves died in that moment too, and we're now this new
yes,
person, and it's about walking that path and trying to figure out who we are, and that's why it's so uncomfortable and why it's so difficult, is we're trying to figure out who is this new version of us
yeah,
and what's our purpose now after this. And I struggle with that on my own journey, and now I know my purpose is to go out in the world and show people that grief can be an empowerment tool. It can. And
yeah,
you're not going to see it right away, by the way. It doesn't happen overnight, but it can become that for you.
yeah.
Um, my grandfather in the mediumship reading, this is another crazy thing that popped out of my medium. I have to share it because of things he said
Yeah.
today. Um, he came through in my mediumship reading and said, your job is to teach men in particular how to feel emotions. And what not a lot of people know about my grandfather, he was a stubborn Norwegian and he did not show emotion very well. We never said I love you very much to each other growing up, but it was always unspoken. It was always there, and it never needed words to be said because you could feel it.
Yeah.
And so when that message came through to me in my mediumship reading, I understood what he meant by it. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to share that little story to tell everybody that um, feel your emotions, be there with them. They're not terrible things. They're not meant to be suppressed or pushed out. They're meant to be heard and seen and brought to the surface because they're
Yeah.
oftentimes sharing a message of something we need to hear. And when we go through that grief and loss scene, sometimes those emotions are very intense. They're very hard to deal with. But make them feel seen, make them feel heard, make them feel understood,
Yeah.
because that intensity will come down, and you'll get that message out of it. And that might be the thing that you need, by the way, if you are stuck in grief. You might need to hear that, as hard as it may be in those moments, and I've had plenty of them. It might be the thing you need to hear. And
Yeah.
once you acknowledge it, by the way, finding out this new person over here gets a little bit easier.
It does, and that's the part of grief that I think people don't get is grief isn't just about physical loss of a human. You're grieving the version of you that you were. You're grieving the life you thought you were going to have with that person or in general. Even if someone doesn't die, you're grieving the loss of them being in your life, loss of a friend, a loss, of a partner, whatever it is. Grief isn't just attached to physical loss. It's grieving versions of ourselves. And when we feel that heaviness and that weight, what spirit has always said to me is your own baggage weighs nothing. Your own baggage weighs nothing. When you feel heaviness, you are carrying somebody else's baggage in the form of beliefs. So you're taking on their pain, what they went through, you're attaching meaning to it, you're creating a story about it, and it became a belief inside of you. Whether that's someone in childhood from trauma and thinking you're not enough or you're not worthy, if it's heavy, if it feels like something's weighing on you, it's not yours, meaning it's not in alignment with the truth of who you are. It's a projection that you accepted as truth about you. And that has been one of the most powerful things that has helped me personally that I've channeled. And when I helped me on my grief journey, not just the grieving of old versions of me, but grieving of, I mean, grief's been a friend of mine for a very long time. I've lost more people than I'd like to admit. And so I'm very familiar with grief, but I never realized how much of their stuff, their beliefs, their projections, their versions of me, their issues that I just held onto like a bag and said, I'm just going to keep carrying this forward again because we have some attachment to who we were with them, who they just them in our lives, our love for them, whatever it is. We just carry it on our shoulders and we keep moving forward. And we're like, why do I feel so exhausted? Why do I feel so weighed down? Why am I so sick all the time? Why am I so depressed? Well, you're probably carrying a lot of baggage that isn't yours to carry.
That is an incredibly powerful gift you just brought to the podcast today. Um, I I'm a little bit speechless to be fair with you because you're making me reflect on my own grief journey at the current moment. But I couldn't agree with you more about that. I think our beliefs and our convictions do weigh us down a lot. And
Yeah,
one of the things I've had to be mindful of in my own journey of life is just realizing, is this belief actually helping me right now? Is it moving me forward? Is it
right.
contributing to my life in a way that I need it to? Or is this something that's holding me back and causing turbulence? Because something I've also learned to piggyback off that is when we live too much in our past, when we live back there, it ruins the present and ruins the future at the same time.
Yeah,
And
because you just
so,
keep reinfusing the old story into new circumstances.
yeah, and that's where we miss out on opportunities to really improve our lives. And
Yeah.
I asked my son Caden for a sign a couple weeks back when we went to a new beach, a new place my wife and I had never been together before, and I asked him for signs. I don't know why, but I kept seeing yellow smiley face things on the road I've never driven on, never been on. Saw yellow smiley face signs, and then I also saw signs that said "Be happy, smile," all the time. And when you live in the past too much of like I like to tell people, I could say that losing my son was a terrible tragedy thing and it's awful and I can label it all those things. And it was in that moment back then. But today where I'm at, he's the thing that moves me forward. He's the thing that
Yeah.
builds my life. He's the thing I celebrate and honor every day. And when I do have those down moments, those signs come flashing in me to say, "Hey, stop that. That was back there. This is where we are today."
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's a beautiful thing if you can give yourself the ability to hold space for your past and learn from it and
Yeah.
go back and acknowledge and reflect on it when you need to. But in the present moment, look for what it's giving you, look for where it's sending you,
Yeah.
because there's always a beautiful moment that will come out of that. And that's what I think you've really shared with us today about your father. He gave you such a beautiful experience going through this grief journey. Yes, it might have taken 10 years, but it doesn't matter at that point. What does matter is that you saw that gift and you found it. And
Yeah.
today, you're the person you need to be because of it. It's just a beautiful part of life.
It really is. And so I'm not necessarily grateful for his death, but I'm grateful for who I became from it.
That's beautiful. And I want to ask you a question real quick. I don't usually ask a lot of people this, but I feel like I can. What would you tell yourself in that moment, that version of Joanna that was going through about to lose her father? What would you say to her if you could talk to that version of yourself
Don't
from
be
today?
afraid to feel what's coming up because I was in such resistance and repression. I was drinking, I was eating, I was doing anything I could to not feel. And that will only make you sick, and exhausted and just destroy your life. And it was so intense all the time. Um, and I would just look at her and say that the more intense it gets, that feeling, whether it's whatever it is, fear, not feeling enough, whatever it is, it's that version of you standing at the door of your heart, pounding on it, saying, "Will you love and accept me in as I am?"
Mm,
It's the old version of you that's dying. We call it dying, but really it's an integration. There was a point of separation the moment the trauma happened, which creates a part of you, right? A separation. Now that part of you you're holding on to, and that feeling gets more intense the closer it gets to the point of integration, the point where it's saying, I'm ready to go back home into your heart, into the whole of who you are, and not be something that's holding you back and weighing you down. So when those emotions rise from whatever it is, and just allow yourself to feel it, it's just like you said, it's just a sensation in your body. You are the one who attaches, the ego attaches a story, it attaches a thing. Anytime there's a story attached to anything, that is ego 100% or an inner child. So I would tell her, feel it all. Feel it all. It doesn't mean anything. It's just sensations. It's literally a version of you that is so desperate to be in peace. Like, look at how we say when someone dies, rest in peace. That version of you is like, okay, this is finally done. I can now rest in peace. I don't have to perform. I don't have to do this anymore. I don't have to be this version of me anymore. But we're not ready to let go because we don't understand that. And so we repress it and we fight it. And then we wonder why we have autoimmune diseases and why we're so overweight or why we're so stressed or why we have addictions. And so I would just look at her and say, feel it all. It's not going to be comfortable, but the faster you just allow yourself to feel without attaching meaning to it, the freer you're going to be. And it wouldn't have taken us so long. We wouldn't have gone through so much pain. Um, and I would tell that to anybody else who's feeling the same, because people don't know what to say to you when you're in grief. And there isn't anything you can say, but what you can do is sit your butt on the ground in the dark and sit next to them and let them know that they're safe to break. They're safe to feel. And that's what people need the most when they're grieving. They need people to just come in and take over and have someone sit down next to them and say, I'm here. You're not alone. Scream, cry, smack the floor, break, whatever you want to do. I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to sit here with you and let you feel safe to break.
That is such beautiful advice as we wrap up the podcast today. I could not agree more with you on that. Grievers do not need to be fixed. And I share a lot in my podcast, I share a lot in my social media. If you were going through grief or feeling stuck in grief, you are not broken. You do not
Yep.
need to be fixed. You do not have some problem or issue, or you're not a blight, anything like that. You're going through the motions as you need to go through them, and you're experiencing those feelings that Joanna talked about as you need to. And you do not need to feel rushed or heal on somebody else's time frame. That just
No, and
needs to
you're
be
allowed
your
to break.
process.
You're allowed to break.
I love that. Joanna, this has been a beautiful podcast. I feel like I could talk to you for a whole
I
another
know.
hour, and I may need to bring you back for another episode, to be very honest. You have a lot of good
I
things
will
to
be more
share.
than happy to.
Uh, well, as we wrap up the podcast, I usually ask my guests a couple questions. One of them is, if you were to run into somebody who is going through grief or feels stuck in grief, what's one thing you would share with them that could help them navigate that journey just a little bit easier?
Besides the feeling, I would say they only want you to be happy. They only want you to be happy. If you want to do, if you are, because some people with time, people get stuck in living for people. If you want to honor them by living your very best life and knowing that they're watching every step you take and cheering you on.
That's a beautiful message. My little boy has showed me that a couple weeks ago. Joanna, if people listen to this podcast and they want to connect with you after listening, where can they find you?
I'm on just about every single social media platform. You can either search just Johanna Burkhart or official Johanna Burkhart, and you will find me.
I love that. Well, for listeners today, I will have all of her social media links in the show notes. So when you get done listening to this podcast, definitely go connect with her and check her out. As you've caught on to in this podcast, she has a beautiful, beautiful experience of connecting in the spiritual world and finding true meaning and purpose through grief. And this is the beauty of what I like to call the empowered grief journey. Is you go through a loss that is very painful, it's very hard to navigate, but when you do find those ways forward, like Joanna shared with us today, that's where grief becomes an empowerment tool for you. And this is where we can celebrate, honor our losses, but we can also live a beautiful life. And as she eloquently said a minute ago, they just want us to live our happiest, best life, is what our ones that have passed on before us truly want. So realize that where you're at today is not the end of your chapter, it's the beginning of a chapter. And we still get to write that story. Um, Joanna, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to it.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Joanna and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Joanna's story. If you are looking for more episodes that are designed to support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know that you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.